Every December, millions of families around the world slice into a golden dome of sweetness that took longer to make than most people spend at work in a week. This isn't just bread. This is panettone, the Italian Christmas miracle that requires 40 hours of patience, 3 separate fermentations, and a technique so precise that bakers say it's harder to master than any pastry in the world. Today, you're going to discover why this tall, fluffy bread has become the symbol of Christmas in over 60 countries. We'll travel from a medieval kitchen in Milan to modern industrial bakeries producing millions of units. You'll see the ancient technique that makes panettone impossibly soft, learn why it hangs upside down after baking, and understand the chemistry behind those 40 hours of fermentation. Whether you call it panettone, panettone, or pan de Pasqua, by the end of this video, you'll never look at this Christmas tradition the same way. This is the complete story of the world's most labor-intensive holiday bread. Let's begin. The legend begins in 1490s Milan, in the kitchen of Duke Ludovico Sforza. During a lavish Christmas banquet, the head chef burned the dessert. In desperation, a young kitchen assistant named Tony offered his own creation, a sweet bread he'd been working on with leftover ingredients: flour, eggs, butter, candied citrus, and raisins. The guests loved it. They called it panettone, Tony's bread. Over time, it became panettone. But historians tell a different story. Panettone likely evolved from pan de tonne, a large bread that Milanese families could only afford at Christmas. What we know for certain is that by the 1900s, Angelo Motta revolutionized panettone. He introduced the tall cylindrical mold and the technique of hanging the bread upside down to prevent collapse, the same method used today. Italian immigrants brought panettone to South America in the early 20th century. In Peru, it became panettone and grew so popular that Peruvians now consume more panettone per capita than Italians. It transformed from an Italian specialty into a global Christmas phenomenon. Today, the panettone industry produces over 100 million units annually worldwide. Italy manufactures approximately 70 million loaves each year, while Peru produces 50 million despite having a fraction of Italy's population. Brazil, Argentina, and Venezuela are also massive markets. The global panettone market is valued at over $1.5 billion and growing 8% annually. In Peru alone, families purchase an average of 3 to 4 panettones per household during the Christmas season, making it the country's second largest food expenditure after Turkey. Everything begins with a mother yeast, called lievito madre in Italian. This isn't the instant yeast you buy at the supermarket. This is a living culture that some Italian bakeries have maintained for over 100 years, feeding it daily like a pet. Lievito madre is a natural sourdough starter made from flour and water, but it's cultivated specifically for sweet doughs. Unlike regular sourdough, which is acidic and tangy, lievito madre is maintained to be mild and slightly sweet, perfect for panettone. Master bakers refresh this starter 3 times per day, every day of the year. Miss a feeding, and you risk killing decades of bacterial development. The mother yeast contains wild yeast strains and lactic acid bacteria that create the characteristic flavor and structure of authentic panettone. These microorganisms work much slower than commercial yeast, which is exactly what makes panettone special. The slow fermentation develops complex flavors and creates an incredibly light, web-like crumb structure that stays soft for weeks. Industrial panettone producers maintain massive quantities of lievito madre, sometimes hundreds of kilograms, in temperature-controlled rooms. Some companies have backup cultures stored in remote locations, like genetic banks, in case their primary culture dies. This isn't just baking, it's biotechnology. Before making panettone, bakers perform multiple refreshments of the mother yeast over 12 to 16 hours. Each refreshment involves mixing the starter with fresh flour and water, letting it rise, then repeating. This strengthens the yeast culture and ensures it's at peak activity. Only when the lievito madre passes the float test, where a small piece floats vigorously in water, is it ready to make panettone. At hour 0, the first dough begins. Bakers mix the activated lievito madre with flour, egg yolks, sugar, and butter. Notice what's missing: the candied fruit, chocolate chips, or raisins. Those come much later. This first dough must develop enormous gluten strength because it will eventually support a massive amount of butter, sugar, and fruit, ingredients that normally weaken dough structure. Professional bakers use high-protein flour, 13 to 14% protein, and mix for 40 to 50 minutes in spiral mixers. The dough is beaten, stretched, and worked until it becomes incredibly elastic and smooth. Temperature control is critical. The dough must stay between 26 to 28 degrees Celsius, 79 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Too cold, and the fermentation slows dangerously. Too hot, and the butter melts, the gluten weakens, and the entire batch fails. Industrial bakeries use jacketed mixers with cold water circulation to prevent overheating from friction. After mixing, the first dough enters its first fermentation, 12 to 16 hours at 28 degrees Celsius with 75% humidity. During this time, the dough should triple in volume. The wild yeast from the lievito madre slowly consumes sugars, producing carbon dioxide, alcohol, and organic acids that create panettone's distinctive aroma. Bakers monitor this fermentation obsessively. They're looking for a domed surface with fine cracks, a sweet acidic smell, and a pH between 4.4 to 4.6. If the pH drops too low, the dough becomes acidic and sour, ruining the delicate sweetness panettone requires. If it doesn't ferment enough, the final bread will be dense and heavy. This is why panettone is considered one of the most difficult baked goods to master. There's no room for error. A commercial bakery producing 50,000 panettones per day cannot afford a failed fermentation batch. After 12 to 16 hours, the first dough has tripled in size and developed its flavor foundation. Now comes the secondo impasto, the second dough that transforms simple bread into Christmas luxury. The fermented first dough goes back into the mixer, and bakers add more flour, more egg yolks, sometimes 20 to 30 yolks per batch, more sugar, vanilla, honey, and most importantly, significantly more butter. High-quality panettone contains 30 to 40% butter by weight. This is what makes it incredibly rich and keeps it moist for weeks. Then come the inclusions: candied orange peel, candied citron, and raisins soaked in rum or orange liqueur. Traditional Italian panettone uses large chunks of candied fruit, not the tiny diced pieces found in cheap versions. Quality panettone contains 20 to 30% fruit by weight. Chocolate chip panettone replaces the candied fruit with dark chocolate chunks that won't melt during baking. The mixing process for the second dough is delicate. Add everything too fast, and the dough tears apart. The butter must be incorporated gradually at room temperature. Cold butter won't emulsify, warm butter makes the dough greasy. Professional bakers add butter in 3 to 4 stages over 20 to 30 minutes of mixing. The dough transformation is visible. It goes from sticky and rough to silky, glossy, and elastic. When properly developed, the dough should pass the window pane test. You can stretch a small piece thin enough to see light through it without tearing. But there's a problem. All that butter, sugar, and fruit has weakened the gluten structure that was so carefully built in the first dough. The dough is now fragile and heavy. This is why the second fermentation is so critical. The second dough rests for 30 to 60 minutes before being divided and shaped. During this rest, the gluten relaxes and the yeast begins generating gas again, preparing the dough for its final rise. Panettone's iconic tall, domed shape comes from its special paper mold, the panettone. These aren't just decorative, they're structural engineering. The paper mold must be strong enough to contain the expanding dough during fermentation and baking, tall enough to allow upward growth, and porous enough to allow moisture to escape. Industrial producers use food-grade paper molds that can withstand 180 degrees Celsius 356 degrees Fahrenheit for up to an hour. Each portion of dough, typically 500 g, 750 g, or 1 kilogram, is shaped into a tight ball using a specific technique. Bakers tuck the dough under itself repeatedly, creating surface tension that helps the panettone rise upward rather than spread outward. The shaped dough ball is placed in the paper mold, and here's a critical detail. The dough should fill only 1/3 of the mold. It needs room to triple in size during the final fermentation and baking. Before the final rise, some bakers score the top of the dough with a cross pattern and place a small piece of butter in the center. This is called scarpatura and helps create the characteristic cracked, domed top. Others simply let the dough crack naturally as it expands. The molded panettones are then placed in climate-controlled proofing chambers. In industrial bakeries, thousands of panettones sit on racks in rooms that look like something from a science fiction movie, all precisely temperature and humidity controlled. This is the moment of truth. The final fermentation takes 6 to 8 hours at 28 to 30 degrees Celsius with 70 to 80% humidity. The dough must rise until it reaches about 1 to 2 centimeters below the rim of the paper mold. Not enough rise, and the panettone will be dense. Too much rise, and it collapses in the oven, a disaster called il crollo, the collapse, that haunts every panettone baker. Industrial bakeries use laser sensors and cameras to monitor the rise of each panettone. When the dough reaches the optimal height, that entire rack moves automatically to the oven. In artisan bakeries, master bakers rely on experience. They can tell by sight and touch when the dough is ready. The perfect panettone dough at this stage feels like a marshmallow, soft, airy, and delicate. Press it gently, and it should spring back slowly. The surface should be smooth and dry, not sticky. Temperature fluctuations during this fermentation are catastrophic. A sudden drop in temperature can stop fermentation completely. A spike in temperature can cause over-fermentation and collapse. This is why industrial panettone production requires specialized climate-controlled facilities. Some producers use shock-proofing, a technique where the temperature is slightly lowered in the final hour of fermentation. This slows the yeast activity and strengthens the dough structure slightly, reducing the risk of collapse in the oven. When the fermentation is complete, the panettones move immediately to baking. Any delay risks overproofing. Panettone bakes at a relatively low temperature, 165 to 180 degrees Celsius, 330 to 356 degrees Fahrenheit, for 40 to 60 minutes depending on size. This gentle baking is essential because panettone must cook through to the center without burning the exterior or drying out the crumb. The oven's heat causes the final oven spring, a dramatic expansion in the first 15 minutes of baking as the yeast gives its last burst of activity before dying at high temperature. The carbon dioxide bubbles expand, the alcohol evaporates, and the structure sets. Professional panettone ovens are convection ovens with precise heat distribution. Hot spots create uneven baking, a raw center or burnt exterior. Many industrial bakeries use rotating rack ovens where the entire rack of panettones rotates slowly, ensuring even heat exposure. Bakers know the panettone is done when the internal temperature reaches 94 to 96 degrees Celsius, 201 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and the top is deep golden brown. A toothpick inserted in the center should come out clean. But here's where panettone gets really unusual. What happens next is completely counterintuitive to every other baking rule you know. The moment panettones come out of the oven, while still in their paper molds, bakers flip them completely upside down and suspend them on special racks. They hang inverted for 8 to 12 hours until completely cool. This looks absurd, but it's absolutely necessary. The panettone's crumb structure is so delicate when hot that gravity would compress it if left upright. The weight of the bread would collapse onto itself, creating a dense, gummy texture at the bottom. Hanging upside down, the weight stretches the crumb structure as it cools, maintaining those fine air pockets throughout. The technique also prevents moisture from condensing at the bottom of the bread. Industrial bakeries have entire rooms filled with thousands of upside-down panettones hanging from ceiling racks. It looks like a bat cave of Christmas bread. Only after fully cooling can the panettone be turned upright again. Once cooled, panettones are removed from their baking molds and inspected. Quality control checks for proper height, even color, good crumb structure when a sample is cut, and weight accuracy. High-quality panettone is packaged in cellophane bags or wrapped in plastic to maintain freshness. The wrapping is crucial because panettone, despite being a baked good, stays incredibly moist for weeks or even months when properly sealed. This long shelf life comes from several factors: the high butter and sugar content, both natural preservatives, the low pH from fermentation, which inhibits mold growth, and the long baking time, which reduces water activity. Properly stored panettone can last 2 to 3 months at room temperature without preservatives. Some premium artisan producers add no preservatives at all, relying entirely on traditional methods. Industrial producers may add small amounts of sorbic acid or potassium sorbate to extend shelf life to 6 months. The final panettone is then placed in its decorative box or tin, often elaborate designs featuring Christmas themes, winter scenes, or traditional Italian motifs. Premium panettones come in luxurious packaging that makes them popular as gifts. From start to finish, from feeding the mother yeast to packaging, making panettone takes 40 to 48 hours of active process time. So now you know why that golden dome on your Christmas table represents some of the most complex baking on earth. 40 hours of fermentation. 3 separate doughs. A living yeast culture maintained for generations. Precise temperature control at every stage. And the bizarre ritual of hanging bread upside down. Panettone isn't just a Christmas tradition. It's a testament to Italian baking mastery that has spread across the world, becoming part of holiday celebrations from Sao Paulo to Lima, from Buenos Aires to your own table. The next time you slice into a panettone, notice that incredibly soft, web-like crumb structure. Those air pockets took 40 hours to create. That's not just bread, that's edible patience. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Christmas traditions, subscribe for more videos exploring the fascinating processes behind everyday products. What should we investigate next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Merry Christmas and happy baking!